Death also forgot these stars, but so did time. Despite being born before television, they managed to survive. Even at 99, one dance superstar can still outstrip most 30-year-olds. After turning 100, a gorgeous actress recalls working with Marlon Brando as if it were yesterday. Last year, a well-liked TV dad who was approaching 100 years old was seen dancing on a desk on television. From TikTok to World War II, they have witnessed it all. They also live to tell about it, unlike their well-known companion. Van Dyke, Dick. Born in 1925, Dick Van Dyke is still going strong at the age of 99. He has been making people smile, laugh, and sing for almost 70 years. He was one of Hollywood's most adored stars because of his enthusiasm, sense of humor, and love of performing. People enjoyed watching him whether he was making jokes on TV or dancing on rooftops. In the late 1950s, he got his big break on Broadway. He then received a Tony Award for his performance in Bye Bye Birdie in 1960. Everything changed in that instant. Everyone wanted to see more of Dick Van Dyke all of a sudden. He had a lighthearted, fun, yet astute sense of style. Though you knew it would be good, you had no idea what he would do next. He quickly established himself as a familiar face on TV. He portrayed Rob Petrie on The Dick Van Dyke Show from 1961 to 1966. It was really popular. He co-worked with Mary Tyler Moore, and the two of them ended up being one of the most popular couples on television. He was a master of physical comedy in addition to being humorous. Just one glance. He had the entire nation giggling after only one slip-up. For the show, he received 3 Emmy Awards. It was more than simply jokes. It was his actions, his reactions, and the way he made things appear simple. Van Dyke, nevertheless, didn't stop at television. He played the roles of the elderly bank manager and Bert the chimney sweep in the 1964 film Mary Poppins. He illuminated the screen with his charm, music, and dancing. It didn't matter that he was still made fun of for having a British accent. He left a lasting impression. Shortly thereafter, he received an offer to play James Bond. "Have you heard my British accent?" he asked, laughing. People loved him even more because of his honesty. In Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, he portrayed Caractacus Potts in 1968. It was a vibrant, crazy tale about an automobile with magic. Van Dyke added to its enchantment. Children adored it. Parents also did. Even though The Kid Catcher gave some people nightmares, it nevertheless holds a special place in people's hearts decades later. He continued to labor as the years passed. He made a comeback to television in the 1970s with the new Dick Van Dyke program. He starred as a doctor who solved crimes in Diagnosis, Murder in the 1990s. He even appeared in films like Night at the Museum and Dick Tracy. He sung and danced once more in Mary Poppins Return at the age of 93. Demonstrating his continued flair. Van Dyke hasn't slowed down much as he approaches 100. On his 99th birthday in 2024, he claimed to be discussing a new role with a studio. To keep himself occupied, he made a joke about appearing in a comedy as someone's grandfather. He's got that kind of spirit. Constantly anticipating and eager to amuse. He takes pride in his work. He brought up Mary Poppins and the Dick Van Dyke Show when asked about his favorite moments. He is aware that things have changed. He is grateful that fame doesn't stay as long as it formerly did. People adored him because he was able to pursue his passion. He had to postpone a few activities in April of 2025. Meeting large crowds and traveling had gotten too difficult. He grinned and remarked, "I feel old," in response to a question about how he was doing. He also made a joke about praying to live to be 99. His humor was evident even at that very moment. He is Eva Marie Saint, that's who. The narrative of Eva Marie Saint didn't start out in the public eye. On July 4, 1924, she was born in Newark, New Jersey, a long way from Hollywood. She did not become famous after graduating from college. Working as a page at NBC and working hard in New York, she began modestly. In the late 1940s, she acted on television and radio, seizing any chance she could. She was being referred to as the Helen Hayes of television before most people even knew her name. Those in the business recognized her brilliance early on. However, 1954 was her big break, and it was huge. She played opposite Marlon Brando in her debut motion picture role, which was in the classic On the Waterfront. This type of opportunity is what most actors hope for. She got an Academy Award for doing more than merely doing her part well. Imagine making your debut appearance on a movie set. and taking an Oscar with them. She only received $7,500 for the position. However, it had a valuable effect on her career. The significance of that film extended beyond its visuals. It was intense behind the scenes. Elia Kazan, the director, employed psychology to elicit a genuine emotional performance from her. In order to give their sequences a more authentic sense, he deliberately induced tension between her and Brando. According to Saint, Kazan instructed her to keep Brando out of a room. Regardless. Then, in an attempt to distract her, Brando entered and began to tease her. Throughout the entire shot, she maintained her unsteadiness, and it worked. The feelings were honest, unfiltered, and not to be forgotten. She didn't limit herself to a single role after that. She and Alfred Hitchcock collaborated on North by Northwest in 1959. This was a complete metamorphosis, not simply another job. The dramatic, somber version of Saint was not what Hitchcock wanted. He accompanied her shopping, assisted her in choosing her clothes, and even gave her voice coaching to make it softer, lower, and more enigmatic. He instructed her not to move her hand and to always gaze Cary Grant in the eyes. And to speak more softly. Wanted something unique, elegant, and stylish, and she delivered. One of her most famous performances was that one. It was obvious to Hitchcock that he no longer wanted her to do sync-to-sync films. No more somber apartments and black and white scenarios. He wanted her to be a role model for the audience rather than a dishwashing woman. She demonstrated her ability to be both gorgeous and powerful by making that change with ease. Unlike some celebrities, she did not pursue stardom. Throughout her lengthy career, she only made appearances in roughly 20 feature films, choosing her roles wisely. Each role carried weight. She starred in lighthearted, topical flicks like The Russians Are Coming as well as heavy tragedies like Exodus and A Hatful of Rain. The Russians are on their way. In 2006, she even made an appearance as Ma Kent in Superman Returns, where her original co-star Brando was shown in old video as Superman's father. It was clear from that full circle moment how lengthy and significant her trip had been. Her life away from the spotlight is what truly makes her unique. In 1951, she wed director Jeffrey Hayden, with whom she remained for 65 years until his death. In Hollywood, that type of dedication is uncommon. She continued to be engaged in the arts, helping with young writers, and giving stage readings when she wasn't filming. She continued to give back. In 2021, Eva Marie Saint finally retired from performing. Was 97 years old. There are very few Hollywood celebrities who can claim to have maintained their integrity during their nearly 80-year career. At 100, she is not only the oldest living Academy Award winner but also a living reminder of the heyday of film. Brooks. Almost a century after his birth in 1926, Mel Brooks continues to make people laugh. He is more than just a legend at 98. He is a living example of comedy. He is among the very few individuals in the world to have received an Oscar, Tony, Grammy, and Emmy. As if he's accomplished everything, he receives an honorary Oscar in 2024. His career is like an endless highlight reel. It all began when television was just getting started. One of the most significant TV shows of its day, Your Show of Shows, featured him as a young comedy writer. He wasn't by himself. Future titans like Woody Allen and Neil Simon were all around him. Jokes were flying around that room faster than the camera could capture them. He also met Carl Reiner there, a 2,000-year-old guy whose friendship developed into one of the funniest acts ever. What started off as a friendly jest evolved into popular comedy CDs and, years later, earned him a Grammy. He formerly relied only on their albums to support himself financially. His wit paid the bills, but he was broke. Brooks continued after that. He became the producer of a bizarre musical that celebrated Hitler. And it worked somehow. He developed it into a Broadway success that broke records in addition to winning an Oscar for it. The majority of individuals only make one version of something before moving on. Years apart, Brooks successfully adapted the same narrative for the theater and the screen. Then came his heyday, the 1970s. He released two legendary comedies, Blazing Saddles and Young Frankenstein, in 1974. One addressed racism in the Old West at a rate of one joke per minute. The other was a love letter to vintage monster films in black and white. In both, Gene Wilder excelled. However, Brooks didn't merely remain in the background. He portrayed 5 distinct characters in Blazing Saddles, some of whom were without acknowledgement. He brought that kind of crazy enthusiasm to everything. He's more than simply a laugher, though. He discreetly founded Brooks Films, a production firm that created somber, impactful films like The Fly and The Elephant Man. He knew people were expecting jokes, so he didn't put his name on the credits. The subject was supposed to be serious, and he didn't want the prospect of a Mel Brooks film to divert the audience. It is uncommon to have that level of self-awareness, particularly in the entertainment industry. His private life was as impressive. His 41-year marriage to actress Anne Bancroft is almost unheard of in Hollywood. Even in unpleasant situations, there was humor in their home. Their son Max once pretended to be an SS officer at a dinner gathering in order to stir up controversy. Brooks was appalled. But Bancroft simply asked, "Max," as she glanced at her son. "Epaulettes? Really?" Their entire family was full of that kind of wit. Become a successful writer as well, by the way. Brooks continued to write when he approached 100 years old. He wrote World War Z. He published a memoir in 2021. More than 40 years after the first movie, he returned in 2023 with History of the World, Part 2 for Hulu. He even provided the voices for popular films like Toy Story 4. He made TV appearances. He remained in sight. He continued to be humorous. Above all, he continued to be Mel Brooks. Hong James. The narrative of James Hahn's life is not one you hear very often. 1929 was his birth year. To Chinese immigrants in Minneapolis, Minnesota. It all began when his father owned a herb store. Little James would stare with wide eyes as Peking opera artists would pass by the store. His intended career path was engineering. His heart was never in it, even though he graduated from USC with a degree. He took a leap and rushed into Hollywood in 1953. But back then, those who looked like James were not treated well by Hollywood. Real Asian American parts were few and frequently bland or even offensive, and white performers continued to play Asian characters in makeup. When James realized that, he decided to forge his own route rather than wait around. Together with actress Meiko Iwamatsu, he founded East West Players, a theater company exclusively for Asian American performers. Acting was only one aspect of this, another was survival, making a place for oneself in a world that refused to give it up. At one point, East West Players were linked to 70% of Asian American actors in Hollywood. That was the extent of his influence. Featuring a series of supporting parts in films featuring Hollywood giants like John Wayne and Clark Gable, his acting career took off in the 1950s. Although they weren't key positions, they provided access. James continued to walk through it. Year after year, show after show, film after film, they never stopped acting. He would appear on television 10 times a year, each time portraying a totally different character. With no other option, he had to be adaptable. He made it memorable by using anything he could acquire. James was no longer merely a character actor after the 1980s hit. He was destined to become a legend. You know, Lo Pan, if you've ever watched Big Trouble in Little China. That spectral bad guy with crazy eyes and a sick sense of humor? James is that person. He also appeared in Blade Runner a few years prior as the man who constructed the replicants. It was a little role, but he made it significant. He made an impact in comedy, drama, sci-fi, and horror. He even portrayed the stern Maître D in Seinfeld's episode of the Chinese restaurant and a supernatural dry cleaner in Tales from the Dark Side. People recalled his voice and look even though they didn't always know his name. That voice became equally famous. He was the strict advisor, Shi Fu, in Mulan. He was Po's father, the endearing noodle-making goose in Kung Fu Panda. Additionally, his performance earned him an Annie Award when that series received a holiday special. He continued, providing the voice of television series and films into his 90s, such as Wendell and Wild in 2022 and Turning Red. In the same year, a miraculous event occurred. James assumed a significant position in Everything, Everywhere, at the age of 93. With an amazing ensemble, he gave a performance that was both new and classic. James and the movie both took home accolades. James stood on that platform, demonstrating to the world that he was still at the top of his game as the Screen Actors Guild honored the entire ensemble. The long-awaited arrival of a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame followed. He was the oldest recipient in history. There were speeches and lion dancers. It was Jamie Lee Curtis. He stood proudly next to Daniel Day Kim, who spearheaded the effort to obtain him that star. It was more than just James receiving a star. It has to do with his symbolism. Years of hardship, perseverance, and a determination to not be forgotten. James has never held back when discussing his experiences as an Asian actor in early Hollywood. He says plainly that he played several Chinaman roles. Accents, clichés, hats, everything. However, he used those minor components as stepping stones. He never gave up and opened opportunities for others in addition to working for himself. He continues to advocate for young Asian and Pacific Islander talent as an Academy member, reminding the public that more has to be done. He is in his 90s and yet not slowing down. Patsy Lee in The Keepers of the Five Kingdoms is the film he is producing. Still producing, still working. I'm still dreaming. At his star ceremony, Jamie Lee Curtis expressed it best: "It's about fucking time." She is correct. For Hollywood, James Hong sacrificed everything. At last, Hollywood returned the favor. Waldo, Elizabeth. In 1918, Elizabeth Waldo was born close to the Yakima Indian Reservation in Yakima, Washington. She was singing by the time she was 3 years old. She was playing the violin at the age of 5. The renowned violinist Heifetz saw her talent early on. He assisted her in obtaining a scholarship to study classical music at Philadelphia's Curtis Institute of Music. Her life changed significantly in 1940. She was asked to join the All-American Youth Orchestra by conductor Leopold Stokowski. Her journeys across North and South America permanently altered her. In locations she had never been, she heard traditional music, and it stoked her passion. She fell in love with the idea of conserving music from ancient cultures and began collecting antique instruments. She joined the Los Angeles Philharmonic when the group disbanded during World War II. Waldo was not intended to remain in one location for very long. She traveled to Mexico, where she discovered a new rhythm for her songs. She collaborated with one of the nation's most adored singers, Agustin Lara, and gave performances on national radio. She also met Diego Rivera, a muralist who recognized her unique qualities. He encouraged her to develop a method for writing originally unwritten music for pre-Columbian instruments. Elizabeth Waldo entered the Hollywood industry in 1945. In the film Song of Mexico, she performed as a violinist. Elizabeth was able to gain access because Bing Crosby had found her sister, Janet Waldo. She played in the orchestras for Crosby's films and eventually worked on a number of them. Her distinctive sound was recognized by major composers such as Lalo Schifrin and Maurice Jarre. Even Dr. Zhivago incorporated her work, where the emotional depth of the movie was influenced by her music. She went on tour a few years later with Ima Sumac, a Peruvian-American soprano who was renowned for fusing jazz, opera, and Caribbean rhythms with Andean folk melodies. Performed throughout Europe, Las Vegas, and Hollywood. This encounter inspired Waldo to study music from other cultures and figure out how to combine them. Then came her most innovative piece. She started producing recordings in the late 1950s using vintage instruments that had never been heard in a recording studio. She was ahead of her time with her albums Realm of the Incas, Rites of the Pagan, and Maracatu. They documented more than simply historical music. They used old sounds to create something fresh. Her collaborator, jazz producer Gene Norman, described the encounter as unforgettable. She continued after that. She began composing music for films like Chuck, Dios de la Lluvia, and Lost on Paradise Island in the 1970s. She became interested in Chinese music around the 1980s. She created a Pan-Asian group that gave concerts in schools all across Los Angeles and even went on tour in China. The Xi'an Symphony Orchestra performed her composition, Concierto Indo-Americano. It was just another instance of how she used music to bridge disparate cultures. Elizabeth Waldo was a strong supporter of education as well. In Northridge, California, she established Rancho Cordillera del Norte, a cultural center. Her home wasn't the only one. It featured a 150-seat theater where she gave lectures and performed. The New Mission Theater was also founded by her, a venue for multicultural arts and music. She never lost her passion as she grew older. She put out several albums in the 2000s, such as Heartstrings, Soul of the Americas, and Land of Golden Dreams. She continued to write at the age of 97, this time about Chinese immigrants during the Gold Rush. At 106 years old, Elizabeth Waldo is among the last surviving connections to the heyday of Hollywood. However, that is only a small part of her legacy. She did more than simply play music. She preserved it, changed it, and used it to bridge centuries and continents. White, Jacqueline. Born in Beverly Hills in 1922, Jacqueline White briefly dominated Hollywood screens in the 1940s with her calm power. She is now almost a century old and one of the few persons who survived the heyday of Hollywood. She was in the public eye for only roughly 10 years. However, anyone who enjoys vintage cinema, particularly the grim, gloomy realm of film noir, may still relate to her work. Her foray into acting was accidental. She was discovered by a casting director when she was just 17 years old and acting in a UCLA theater class. Everything changed at that little time. In 1942, she signed a contract with MGM after taking a screen test shortly after. However, the studio didn't give her anything to work with despite her attractiveness and talent. She ended up doing supporting roles while MGM concentrated on its more well-known stars, as was the case with many young actresses under contract at the time. Nevertheless, she developed from those early assignments. Among the studio productions she starred in was Air Raid Wardens, a comedy starring Laurel and Hardy. She also appeared in Song of Russia and Three Hearts for Julia, when she reconnected with an old acquaintance. She was still hoping for anything more, but these little victories mounted up. When she transferred from MGM to RKO Pictures in 1947, that something happened. She eventually began to land roles at RKO that truly showcased her abilities. She had top billing in smaller productions and was paired as the second lead in big-budget movies. Her career peaked throughout these years. She also developed a robust and enduring filmography in a relatively short period of time. One of her most notable appearances was in the film Crossfire, which tackled challenging subjects like anti-Semitism head-on. She played a lighter part in Banjo that year and then made an appearance in the suspenseful Mystery in Mexico. She co-starred with Randolph Scott in the western Return of the Bad Men, whom she subsequently recalled as courteous and friendly. 2 more films soon followed, making westerns a minor but significant part of her repertoire. However, the 1952 film The Narrow Margin was the one that cemented her legacy. It was a low-budget, suspenseful noir that ended up being a classic. Surprisingly, she had already departed from Hollywood when she was hired. Her acting career seemed to be ended after she married Bruce Anderson in 1948 and relocated to Wyoming. On a brief return trip to Los Angeles, however, she met producer Stanley Rubin and director Richard Fleischer at the RKO commissary. She returned for one final movie because of that chance meeting. There was drama in that film as well. After it was completed, Howard Hughes, the new owner of RKO, kept it back for 2 years because he wasn't sure if he should remake it with bigger stars or re-edit it. Ultimately, the final version was released almost unaltered, with only a few moments res-hot. The wait was worthwhile. The film has a perfect score on Rotten Tomatoes, and critics commended its tension and tight plot. And suddenly she was gone, without warning. She put her family before fame at the age of just 28. Jacqueline White created a life away from the cameras while others sought positions and held onto the limelight. She remained married for more than 50 years and reared 5 children in Wyoming. Although her spouse went away in 2000, their lengthy marriage speaks for itself, one of unassuming dedication and a strong sense of priorities. Later in life, she made sporadic public appearances, occasionally going to film festivals where younger fans first saw her and learnt about her work. People were reminded that there is more to the golden age of film than just reading about it. People actually lived it. She is also one of the few people who can still narrate those experiences from personal experience. She is more than a relic from the past at the age of 102. She is a living reminder of the heyday of Hollywood magic. Her performances continue to be notable for their understated honesty, and her films, particularly The Narrow Margin, have attracted new audiences. Didn't require elaborate settings or lengthy talks. You believed whatever she said and looked at. Jacqueline White demonstrated that sometimes a brief, exceptional moment can make the biggest impression in a society where careers are frequently evaluated by how long they persist.